The three incidents that I wanted to connect were Nuremberg, Millet, the massacre, and the Pete Hegseth misadventures in the Caribbean near Venezuela. What those three demonstrate is a lack of accountability. The It would be, you could argue that the two most consequential takeaways from uh, from the Nuremberg trials following World War II, putting Nazis on trial for war crimes, but also for crimes that are very very relevant today, where killing enemy soldiers, uh, uh, combatants, shooting them while they're in the water. Yeah, uh, just a very troubling echo from what was going on in the 1940s, the first half of the 1940s. Similarly, in the Millet massacre, which was in 1968 May, and the details of that didn't come out for until the next year. But U.S. It's it's easy to point fingers and stigmatize Nazis for war crimes because of the Holocaust and the other uh, reprehensible behavior. But when it's your home team, as it was with the My Lai massacre, uh, between 200 and 300 civilians in this village were murdered. They were executed. There was sexual violence and all other forms of atrocities. It was arguably what turned public sentiment on the war around as uh, it was an inevitability. It was there were a number of incidents that were stacking up over time, but this just turned everything upside down. And once the more detailed press accounts came forward after diligent work from journalists within the next a year following the massacre, it really there were calls to end the hostilities, and they did begin to wind down in certain cases. It took some doing, but this is very relevant to what is going on north of the Venezuelan coast and a little further east towards Suriname, um, Trinidad and Tobago, and also in the Eastern Pacific, where a well publicized account of what remarkably was the first um, attack, where allegedly, and the evidence will be shown, but two individuals who were in the boat were subsequently killed or executed, what they called double tap. They circled back to make sure that everybody was dead. And according to two reliable sources, that was at the direction of Pete Hegseth, if not at the moment of the murder of the two last individuals on the first interdiction, but that was his overall directive to his command, that don't leave any survivors, which is completely against the rules of war, our own military doctrine as the United States, but also the ICC and other governing bodies. It's just it is black letter law. It is not a lot of room for ambiguity, and a great deal of that comes from Nuremberg and Millet, where we learned the lessons. We changed the doctrine and enforced it. And in another tremendous irony in the Trump administration, what they are doing to affect accountability overall is they are taking down any quote unquote guardrails, and they're firing all the cops. The JAG officers, who, as you know, are the judge advocate generals, who are not in fact judges, but they're lawyers, military lawyers that provide guidance to the warfighters and tell them the rules of the game, what they can and cannot do according to the rules of war. The Trump administration, through Pistol Pete Hegseth, has fired most, if not all, of the JAG officers. It's very alarming. And those of you that follow such issues, there have been JAG officers that have given interviews on how this is an absolute no go. That there's no accountability without that kind of structure. And it's not limited to the military. The inspectors general in so many federal agencies have been culled and fired and not replaced, even with loyalists, as Trump has done in so many other ways. But it's very unsettling that, and if you think about it from the perspective of the troops, a young infantryman, a young sailor, and all you want is you're in a high stress environment. You want a clear directive from the military hierarchy. You want it clear because ambiguity, Pete Hegseth was talking about using fog of war as an excuse for bad behavior. That's not what fog of war is. It's a very real thing. War is stressful. War is stressful. And if you don't have the clear directive, you're likely to make mistakes. And if the behavior of the military, the current military hierarchy, is so poor that retired military, distinguished astronauts like Mark Kelly and the other intelligence officers that put out that video 10 days plus ago, just reminding troops and military officers alike that you are not required to follow illegal orders just because the Secretary of Defense tells you to do something. That doesn't mean do it. That's what the JAGs are there for, and those have been taken out of the command structure and the decision making process. Particularly after My Lai, that was the most important change, I would argue, to military doctrine, is embedding the JAG officers with the individual units. Very important. So you have that expertise on hand in high stress environments, so you know what you are allowed to do according to the rules of combat, armed combat. Yeah, so that very, very deeply troubling that those professionals have been taken out. So as we move towards Christmas and Hanukkah and the other holidays in December and January, it we have to keep the pressure on Pete Hegseth, on Donald Trump for full disclosure on all of these interventions in in and around the Caribbean. There is nobody is arguing that drugs don't harm the American people. Fentanyl does. Fentanyl primarily comes across the border from Mexico, or some of it through those semi-submersibles in California, and perhaps even in Texas. But fentanyl is an issue. You don't have to go too far to hear uh, absolutely horrifying stories about the impact of fentanyl on those that get hooked on it. But there's a way to go about this, as we talked about in our last visit. Um, the Coast Guard is trained to do drug interdiction. They uh, back before Tom Clancy was making movies. They were taking a very active role in drug interdiction, and they're very good at it. They understand what the rules of engagement are. They are clear on their mission. They have a lot of reps apprehending drug boats, taking custody, chain of custody with the evidence, which is so important. It seems that your Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, would prefer just to annihilate the boats and the people in the boats, because if no evidence, then no accountability. I know some people cheer that sort of approach. If I were in a family who was adversely impacted by fentanyl, again, not our issue in the current Caribbean exploits, but I would feel anger and sadness, and would be a normal, understandable human reaction to want some retribution. And the Trump administration, through the president himself, Stephen Miller, uh, little Marco Rubio, and Pistol Pete, are one of the first things that Pete Hegseth communicated to the troops when he came on board was warrior culture. Warrior culture. We've gotten soft in the military. So what he did to try to create a warrior culture where he suggested one did not exist was he fired a bunch of black and female military officers, and then went out on stage in front of his commanders that he flew in from all over the world, and essentially shit himself and said some things about fat officers, fat generals, and demeaned the command structure. That if you believe that that goes to creating a warrior culture, when a Fox weekend Fox News host is running around like an asshole on stage and saying silly things. If that creates a culture, I believe it does, uh, but it's the wrong message and the wrong culture, and it's certainly the wrong messenger and the wrong commander in chief in order to achieve the desired outcomes. But in any case, so that was my trip down the happy holiday memory lane through Nuremberg, Milai, and coastal Venezuela and environs. Um, but it's as they say and say too frequently, is that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Here you can hear the rhymes very clearly from the lessons learned in Nuremberg to Milai and again in Venezuela. The other random items attendant to this this current exercise, Flex, is that the carrier battle group that is there, the Gerald R. Ford Carrier Battle Group, which is supported by a large number of ships, is burning through something like $50 million a week during this exercise as the administration uh, cuts SNAP benefits uh, and has people dying in other parts of the world where some of Trump's supporters have very little concern for USAID cuts, even though now the numbers are starting to come in on lack of vaccines, lack of AIDS treatments, and lack of food, that there will be, by the end of Donald Trump's term, assuming he goes 4 years, there will be tens of thousands more dead human beings because of those decisions. You can argue that money better spent at home, fine. Money better spent in communities as opposed to ballrooms, whether or not there are oligarchs donating to defray the cost of the construction, but their money better spent than the goodwill that that we're destroying, taking bribes from drug lords, right? Juan Orlando Hernandez, former president of Honduras. We visited with him earlier this week. That's 500,000 kilos of cocaine into American cities, executing people in prisons to avoid witness testimony, and trafficking in machine guns too. So a well-rounded gentleman, but your president Donald Trump pardoned him for what? Because he was part of a Joe Biden conspiracy to convict an innocent man? No, no. That means that Donald Trump obtained a benefit for that service. What it is, we'll eventually find out. You've AI, there's a lot of information out there, and not as many places to hide it. So we'll learn eventually. But they, the Bitcoin, the Sun's business in the UAE and KSA, it's all clear that the corruption is going on. So while they're doing these other things to enrich themselves, if the Trump administration were instead working on ways to provide affordable health care and food to Americans, particularly in mega districts that are suffering now or will suffer profoundly when the Medicaid cuts, Medicare, Medicaid cuts go into effect, it's going to disproportionately affect poor communities in states that Donald Trump carried. Maybe if we had professionals focused on that as opposed to military adventurism. And the final item is I want you to keep it in the back of your mind because while we're doing this, to whatever degree, we're messing with the Chinese Communist Party's oil contracts on the Venezuelan oil output. If Donald Trump has in his mind that he wants that oil, which is some of the dirtiest. I'm not a geologist, clearly, but it is from a refiner's point of view, the Venezuelan oil is some of the least desirable product in the universe, but it is also the most plentiful. So you make trade-offs, and you say it's costs more to refine, but there's a whole hell of a lot of it. The Chinese have enforceable contracts for 90% of the Venezuelan output. Your president, Xi, and excuse me, and you say, am I intimidated by Donald Trump and the United States? My Mandarin language skills are a little rusty, but to roughly translated, I would imagine President Xi would say, fuck no. Fuck no. Not intimidated. He has no reason to be. He has he has a only 1 point going on 1.4 billion citizens. He has he has more people in military intelligence than we have under arms in our military right now. He's ready. And so if Hegseth and Trump want to do, I'm an American. I love my country. I loved it more when there wasn't a corrupt leader at the head of it, but I still love my country. But if idiots like Hegseth and others want to FAFO with Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping, they're going to find a willing combatant. Taiwan, they're going to find a willing combatant. Of course, Trump must know that because it's a discoverable fact. The fact that I lived in Venezuela doesn't mean that I get daily reports from what is it, PDVSA, or any of the oil part of the oil cartel. But I know where. I mean, I know where to look. But so do a lot of people. No mystery. It's the oil is spoken for and paid for and under contract to the Chinese, as is much of the oil in Brazil, in Iran, in other places. You start messing around with they need the energy. They don't have as much at home as we're blessed to have here in the U.S. But if you want to see Xi start getting chippy, mess with his oil and FAFO on that. So, in any case, it is a cool 20 odd degree Fahrenheit Saturday, late afternoon, feeling like early evening here in northern Massachusetts. And it's been a pleasure visiting with you all. Um, and I will speak to you tomorrow or maybe Monday. And please kindly um, restack, retweet, subscribe, share, share off the platform, which is something that adds extra value to people like me and people like you and I, because that gets a little more engagement for everybody involved. So spread the love or the hate, but stick with the love. It's the holidays, and you've been great. I love your comments and criticism. I'm almost as much as praise, but everything is constructive, and look forward to connecting with you all again very soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.